My name is Lyle Canseco, and I'm the Acting Director of Programs at the Workers Lab. Through a grant provided by the Open Society Foundation, the Workers Lab partnered with Canary, an emergency relief platform, and the Workers Defense Project, a community organization for low-wage immigrant workers in Texas. Together, we completed a two-part project to study how cash grants can build and strengthen organizational membership. Historically, organizations used cash grants at a much smaller scale, or sometimes not at all. But the unique needs created by the pandemic and a greater willingness by philanthropy to support such initiatives made many organizations pilot these programs or expand ones that already existed. This project first analyzed 7 previous cash grant programs that the Workers Defense Project participated in to understand what had been effective in previous rollouts. And building on those findings, the Workers Defense Project launched the Proyecto Defensa Laboral Grant Circle to distribute cash grants to non-members with the hope of having a high rate of new membership acquisition. We at the Workers Lab have been making sense of emergency cash for a few years now. In 2017, the Workers Lab led a design sprint to get emergency cash to gig workers. We called this effort the Workers Strength Fund and delivered $350,000 in emergency cash grants over the course of the project directly to workers. Because of that work on emergency cash, when the pandemic hit, we were able to respond quickly. We used the learnings and infrastructure from the Workers Strength Fund to create the Workers Fund, COVID-19 Rapid Response, working both with our partners Canary and Steady. Through this effort, the Workers Lab delivered $2.6 million in emergency cash to more than 12,600 workers across the country. And we did both of these, again, previous projects with Canary, which is a good transition to asking Abigail to introduce herself. Abigail, why don't you introduce both yourself, Canary, and your role in this project?
Great, thanks, Lyle. I'm excited to be here today. So my name's Abigail Schneider. I previously was working for the city of Birmingham in Alabama with their COVID-19 response team called Birmingham Strong. And while there, we helped distribute cash to individuals who were suffering from a financial or health crisis brought on by COVID-19. Through that work, I really saw the power of cash grants to help individuals in times of need because of their easy access to get and quick changes that they are able to bring to individuals in times of need. I was a consultant for Canary on this project where I helped the initial interviews and research into the historic amount of cash grants that went out at the start of the pandemic, and then helped put together our final report for this work as well. Canary's role in this project, as Lyle mentioned earlier, they are a mission-driven enterprise that helps create software for grant circles to exist that organizations can use to distribute cash to employees or members or other individuals in society quickly and effectively.
Awesome, thanks. Laura, why don't you also introduce yourself, the Workers Defense Project, and also your role in this project?
Yeah, so my name is Laura Perez Boston. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the organizing director with Workers Defense, and I'm based in Houston. And I'm really excited that we had the opportunity to be a part of this project, not only to do this particular experiment, but also, like you were saying, Lyle, to take a moment to actually step back from this huge growth in our emergency fund program. We did have a small, very narrow emergency fund program that our members set up years ago. And then, of course, during the pandemic, just with such great need, we expanded the purpose of that to include just pandemic recovery. And so we didn't really have a minute even to ask ourselves these questions well, what worked? What didn't work?
Right.
Even to just document and go through what were all the tactics that we tried. And so in addition to this experiment, I just really wanted to appreciate the work that both of your organizations did to help us do that retrospective and really implement lessons going forward.
Yeah, and I think we were able to pause, but I think the great thing about this project is that, pausing can also be hard. And there's challenges around pausing, especially when you're continuing to do the work, right? And so that's really the heart of this, which is like, how can we conduct emergency cash or distribute emergency cash programs while still growing an organization and growing membership? And so, yeah, excited to get into this conversation a little bit. All right, Abigail. Abigail, can you share a little bit about kind of like the background on the project and the questions that we sought to answer, and like the process that we went through at the beginning?
Definitely. So to build off what you were saying earlier, Lyle, we all noticed, and the Open Society Foundation noticed as well, that at the start of the pandemic, it was really an unprecedented amount of money that foundations, organizations, and individuals were giving towards cash grants. And what our goal in this project was to really learn is, hey, what else can happen when we're thinking about what cash grants can do? And the two key questions that we were interested in is, how can we also use cash grants to build worker power? And by worker power, we mean increasing membership within a community-based organization, or increasing also the activity of members within an organization and how much trust and time they were giving to an organization. And then secondly, we also realized that there is this historic tension between ideas of mutual aid and advocacy, where when you're doing mutual aid or giving direct services, there can sometimes be a power imbalance that comes between the person who is giving the aid and the person receiving the aid. Well, the usual sense of what advocacy organizations do and community-based organizations do is people coming together as equals to advocate for change. So how could you use cash transfers that historically might have been seen more as playing into this power dynamic be used actually to enhance and build advocacy and community equality and power within, without that power dynamic? So those were the two things that we were really trying to answer, first through the interviews that we did with the 7 organizations, which range from small organizations like the Workers Defense Project or Out and Lente, Alabama, to more national organizations like One Fair Wage or the National Domestic Workers Alliance. And then from those learnings, which it was just incredible to see the way in which all these organizations came together in times of great stress to meet the needs of their community. What could we learn that then we could work with the Workers Defense Project to try and test a new cash grant model that would allow us to break those barriers between mutual aid and direct services and advocacy, and use cash grants to their best service to help build that worker power that we wanted to see.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Laura, can you help our viewers understand a bit more about the workers that you support and what they've faced throughout the pandemic?
Yeah, of course. I think one of the big things that we saw, and like if we didn't already know, right, I think it's Audre Lorde that said, people don't live single issue lives. And so we're a worker center, we're focused on building worker power, and our members are just like moving through the world, and they rent apartments, live in homes. So we saw, issues of eviction, questions around like access to technology for kids going to school, and just, childcare needs. These are all things that we're probably all impacted by. But we also saw just like the economic disparity really deepen, and that's not by accident. So I also want to flip that language of like, it's not just what did workers face, but how did we see corporate power and elected officials before the pandemic, like create the breeding ground for all of this to happen. So by not having paid sick days, by not having family leave, by not having fair wages, we have a situation where there is no cushion for low wage workers to fall back on. Like that paycheck doesn't come because the restaurant you were working in like closed down. That's it. There's no second, third bank account to dip into. That's not a thing. We also saw a lot of folks getting evicted, food insecurity. But yeah, I think that's the biggest thing, is like looking at the bigger picture of how billionaire wealth like soared. And there were a lot of studies on that, right? At the same time where our communities that we work with, our members, were thrown further into that economic insecurity. And so that's exactly what Abigail was talking about, that of course, if someone's invited to and hears about our emergency fund programs, like our members are inviting them to say, like, we shouldn't even have to have this fund in the first place, right? This is ridiculous.
Right.
Our government should already have both programs that they manage, like the stimulus should not have excluded immigrant workers. We should have robust safety nets at every level of government, but also even like backing up behind that, we should have fair wages, we should have housing for all, we deserve family leave, all of that like would have prevented the need for any type of charity or safety net programs. I mean, probably we always need some safety net programs, right? Because emergencies come up. And so we want to invite people into that fight and help them like really kind of get out of that, what can be really, and we saw this in some of the interviews, like very deep, trying, like really depressive moments of struggle, to think about like how they can be really protagonists in creating an economy and a future that we deserve and that our kids and families deserve. And so we did have lots of opportunities for members to join in that. And that's also what I love about my job at Workers Defense, is that we have a model where our member leaders, who are also immigrant workers in the construction industry and their families, are chairing this committee, an emergency fund committee. And so they decide like, okay, here are the criteria that we want to use. They also were leading this experiment in getting the word out and recruiting participants, because we did have some particular criteria for this experiment, and then helping them with technology. And so making sure that we are like building a model that extends our capacity and also trusts and delegates like leadership roles out to the very community that's, knows their own neighbors and can be part of creating the solution.
Yeah.
And well, can I hop in here for a second?
Yeah, do it.
I think one of the great things about working with the Workers Defense Project and what this project let us do is that the member leaders historically have been giving their time for free and volunteering their time. And one of the things we realized this work is that the organizers are really key to making that transfer between the idea of cash transfers and advocacy. And one of the things that this project let us do is we were able to give stipends to those worker leaders to really honor and value their time that they were giving to this project and their work at Workers Defense Project more broadly.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that. And Laura, thanks for that helpful context as well. Laura, can you also tell us a bit more about the emergency cash you provided over the past year and what you heard from workers?
Yeah, so I think, as you mentioned in the beginning, over the pandemic, I want to say we gave out, I don't have the numbers right in front of me, it was like over $2 million in different buckets of like private donations and grant funds, et cetera. And so this one was, after taking a pause, looking at some of the numbers that Canary and the Workers Lab helped us sift through, to both experiment with this model that Abigail was just mentioning, like providing compensation for the leadership and work that our member leaders were already doing. And then we gave out 70 grants. One of the questions, as Abigail mentioned, is like, what is the most effective way to transfer funds? So we were able to give out a number of them through PayPal.
Abigail, I know you've worked closely with Workers Defense Project to analyze the results of the experiment. Can you tell us more about those results and share like what we saw and what we learned?
Definitely. So to take a step back for a second, we mentioned earlier, our goal for this project was to take learnings from the organizations that we had interviews with, and then take what we learned and apply it to this new grant circle. So the three things that we really wanted to emphasize in this new experiment was, one, just like making it easy for individuals to get cash, because we saw through the first experiment that easy to access cash could be really helpful and did help build loyalty with members to an organization because they really saw them helping them in a time of need. Secondly, we learned, as sort of mentioned before as well, that a structured recruitment process is really helpful to help connect that narrative of emergency cash to greater advocacy efforts. And then lastly, we really need to figure out what was the best mechanism for getting cash to an individual, because historically governments and banks and financial institutions have marginalized or restricted individuals and specifically immigrants from getting access to financial accounts. We have to think about what is the best way to get people their cash. Is it a gift card? Is it cash? Is it a check? Is it PayPal? What can lift that administrative burden that we saw hindering the ability to really focus on organizing power while they were giving cash grants? So in this grant circle that we put together with the Workers' Defense Project, we did sort of two key things to really make sure that we could take cash transfers and use them to build worker power. And wonderfully, we were able to do it really successfully. Some of those key things we did was that we were able to pay those worker leaders to help do that organizing effort in ways that honored their time and gave them more power and time to really do the organizing efforts we needed to recruit new members to apply for a grant circle fund and start getting the cash and then move towards the recruitment process. And then secondly, the Workers' Defense Project put a lot of time into the narrative of what it means for cash transfer to also lead to advocacy. And one of the key questions that we used in this project was, will this cash transfer solve your problems? And the answer is always no. Of course, like, this will help us. It'll still be a band-aid for a larger solution, which then could lead to a conversation with recipients around, okay, what else needs to change? And that's actually what the Workers' Defense Project is working on, are those larger advocacy goals that can change systems so that cash transfers don't actually need to be part of the solution in the future. And through these key design changes that we made in this project, and also using the grant circle that alleviated some of the administrative burden, we had incredibly successful results where 96% of individuals who received grants said that they trusted the Workers' Defense Project, which shows again that cash grants can be used to build trust. And we saw about 50% of individuals who received a cash grant become members of the organization, which is wildly more successful than the historic base rate that we saw at the start of the pandemic, where there was about a 12% conversion rate of cash recipients to new members. So that 50% recipient rate is pretty massive and pretty exciting. And it's really showing how that when you pay organizers and train them around a specific script and have the key next steps and actions for an individual when they're receiving a cash grant, that you can really make that connection between cash recipient to active member within a new worker power organization. So that was sort of really exciting to see that the grant circle was able to draw that connection really clearly.
Yeah. Laura, I'd love to ask you, what does that 50% number, what does that mean to you and to Workers' Defense?
It's like, is the glass half full or half empty? And like, as an organizer, I always want everyone to join the organization. I think everyone should want to. When we ask, like, is someone a member? It's not just like, did they sign up? Did they fill out a form? It's like, are they actually engaged? And so when people are coming to pick up, we did have to do some of these as gift cards just because of tech barriers, right? And also, like, PayPal was certainly not the silver bullet, definitely for like undocumented communities that don't have bank access, et cetera. So that was some of the details, but the 50%, I think, to me means that we were really successful in getting new folks that had never heard about us before, that were going through a really large personal crisis, to like prioritize getting involved in the fight for the long term. And we were able to build trust and like real deep understanding around like root cause issues, and for them to see themselves as being part of that solution. And that's an organizer's job. You know, if you think about when we do like a canvas and go out door knocking or go out to construction sites, like Abigail said, rates of like new membership, like how many doors you have to knock on for someone to say, yes, I want to join the organization, are like really super low. Like same thing, like under 10%. And so this is huge. Of course, folks are getting, you know, financial assistance, and we're not always shelling out cash all the time, but this is really important for us to see how successful we are as an organization about creating that welcoming environment. And I think part of that is that there really is no replacement for that in-person relationship building and trust. So we did purposely build in, you know, at the beginning, a workshop. We did a virtual workshop on Zoom for folks to learn about what is this program, like both the technical, like how do I access it? What are the requirements, blah, blah, blah. But also at least half of that workshop was like, who is Workers Defense? How can you get involved? Talking about some of our past victories and giving them a sense of, you know, even visually in pictures, if they can't be there in person, like, oh, what have actions looked like? And they can see people that might, you know, look like themselves engaging in the fight for economic justice. And then having also other members there at the office, welcoming them, and seeing where the space is physically. So even though we do want to make this more efficient, there are times when we actually purposely put in some barriers for the sake of relationship building.
And I think that's something that we saw throughout looking at the Workers Defense Project's historic cash grants that they gave out throughout the pandemic is the times when there was a higher membership rate or new membership enrollment rate was those smaller cash grant projects and cycles, because there was likely a higher human touch aspect to it. And getting to know someone at the Workers Defense Project was a key essential part of wanting to become a member of that. And that was also what we saw in the interviews, is when we heard those stories of people who received cash and then chose to become a member, they'd always be like, oh, like this organizer made sure I got my cash grant, and they checked up on me and they put in the extra effort. And because I felt seen and heard and supported by them, I knew that this was an organization I wanted to be a part of. So again, like creating those times for personal relationships to be built was key to getting that higher membership rates.
Yeah, I just want to add something else, which is, you know, I think this goes hand in hand with an organizing model that is like wide. So like what I'm thinking about after this is like, okay, this was super successful in terms of having member leaders own relationships with new members, new community members. And so we need to build that out. Like that's actually part of our organizing goals this year for our department, is like, how can we explore some more pod models like that? Because organizers can't hold all the relationships with new members. Like there's just a numbers cap, right? Like we have to sleep at night. And so the more that we can do that, I feel like the better we'll have like a robust organization where folks can be responsive. And like part of that, I want to point out of like the list of things that new folks might look to us for is like, they may not have other institutions in the community that are responsive and that they trust. So we get questions like, my kid has had this issue at school, who can I talk to? Or I need to, I mean, it's awful, but true. Like my family member just died and I need to send their body to Mexico. Like, how do I do that? And so, you know, that's not our main mission or purpose, but we do need to be responsive to people and at least point them in the right direction. And that takes time. And many times, like our member leaders do have access to those same resources or could like ask an organizer. So the more we can build out leaderful structures as worker centers, like the more successful we'll be over the long term. And this helped us, take some more steps in that direction.
Yeah, I think that's important, right? Because like when you're helping people and you're on the ground and you're in the community, you can't just say, well, I'm only going to help you on this one thing, right? You're in conversation with a life, with a neighbor, right? And so, you have to respond to all of that, and you have to, so thank you for calling that out. So I'm going to let me just try to wrap this up, which will allow us to, if we need to like re-say anything at the end, we have a little bit of time. But, Laura and Abigail, we're really grateful to you and the teams at Workers Defense and Canary for your partnership on this work. And, I think we should continue to work toward the establishment of, high quality jobs and access to benefits, which will hopefully make emergency aid less necessary, and toward the creation of like a more robust safety net, which can kind of fill these gaps. But at the same time, as Laura said, we need to acknowledge that workers will have needs that need to be met in the here and now. And so there is an important role for emergency cash programs to serve. And they play the crucial role in helping people to deal with natural disasters, and with economic insecurity. And so for worker organizations, they can be an important way to build trust with members, increasing participation and engagement. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for partnering with us.
Yeah, it's been great. So we're recording, so I'll say I love you both. And if you need anything for the rest of your life, you just text me, okay?
It's on the record.
Likewise.
Likewise.